Oscar So White has been a big topic of conversation over the last year. And in response to Chris Rock's monologue at the Oscars, Jose Antonio Vargas asked this a very interesting question after there was a bit of a blow-up on Twitter among people around Chris Rock's performance. When the media does talk about race, he said, they usually frame it as a white versus black question. Occasionally it's a white versus Latino or white versus Asian and so on. Always white versus something. But what about the conversations that people of color have across and within their communities? So we're going to have one of those today. And I'm going to invite our moderator, Professor Angie Chuang, to kick it off.
Thanks for being here. This is really a moment. It's a moment in this festival, in the industry, in our country. And I thought that maybe one way to encapsulate it, since we are talking about Oscar So White, is to mention some of the hashtags that have come up in recent months and years. The ones that came to mind for me were hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Never Trump, hashtag Not Your Asian Sidekick, hashtag Not Your Mascot, and one of my favorites, hashtag Save Spicy for Your Cheetos. This came up in the Latina community. And so, as you see, I think film culture and popular culture are very much a part of this, as are some incredibly serious and absolutely consequential issues like the presidential election and police brutality. And I think here in documentary is where all of these things come together, and here is where we can have this conversation and help the country have these difficult conversations. And so I'm so excited to have this amazing assemblage of filmmakers, activists to start the 2 days of conversation. And one thing I do want to point out, for me personally, when the Chris Rock moment happened, I was so conflicted because he was having this totally subversive moment where he was pushing back against a white paradigm. And in doing so, he made a pretty crude and not funny anti-Asian American joke when he brought the kids up and called them the accountants. And it brought back this familiar conversation, which is when we push back, when we gain something, does it have to be at the expense of each other? Is it a zero-sum game? Is the slice that we, meaning people of color, get only so big, and do we end up fighting each other for it? And who sliced up this pie this way in the first place anyways? So with that thought, I wanted to bring back to the idea of white versus other, the black and white paradigm. The name of this panel is Beyond the Black-White Divide. So I'm going to introduce each of my amazing panelists and ask them to sort of just speak a little bit about what that means to them. So let's start with, to my right, we have Danielle Jackson, who is the co-founder of the Bronx Documentary Center, an internationally recognized gallery and educational space that uses photojournalism and documentary film to create conversation on social change. Before that, she ran the cultural department at Magnum Photos New York, where she coordinated a range of exhibitions, lectures, and screenings for museums, universities, and photo festivals. And she's now a consultant for her company Culture, which is also the name of a blog that she wrote since her 20s, which can't have been that long ago. You look very youthful. And the consulting practice is dedicated to thoughtful community engagement and audience development. And so Danielle, if you could speak briefly on what Beyond the Black-White Divide means to you.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to have this conversation. Where we founded the Bronx Documentary Center is named one of the fastest growing areas of New York City. And when many people hear that, they assume I'm referring to gentrification, which is not true. It's actually, if you don't know about the South Bronx, it's a historically as of the last maybe 40 years, and particularly predominantly Puerto Rican and African American community, which is now facing an influx in population of Central Americans from Honduras, Guatemala, Mexicans, West Africans, and the Bronx in general is also the most populous area for refugees. It's where most refugees get placed in New York City because the housing is cheaper. So that gave us a lot of questions and considerations to think about when we were programming exhibitions and events and film screenings in this space. What happens when these groups come together and intersect? What are their perceptions or misperceptions of one another? And it actually has almost nothing to do with white people or the idea of white people coming in. There are all kinds of internal relationships that we find ourselves situated in the midst of. So that's a bit of a beginning of how that worked.
Great. And then to Danielle's right is Ramona Diaz, who is an Asian American filmmaker, a Guggenheim Fellow, and an international and national award-winning filmmaker of such works as Spirits Rising, Imelda, The Learning, which is about Filipino school teachers in Baltimore public schools, Don't Stop Believing, Every Man's Journey, about Arnel Pineda, the Filipino who was tapped from YouTube to be the frontman for Journey. And she's received funding from CPB, ITVS, the Center for Asian American Media, the Tribeca Film Institute, the Sundance Documentary Fund, and Ford Foundation, and the list goes on. And I can't possibly list all your awards because we would take up the whole panel, but suffice to say they are many and impressive. So Ramona, tell me about what resonates for you when we talk about beyond the black-white divide.
I'm beyond. I'm the beyond. I'm never part of that conversation because it's invisible, right? It's black and white. As an Asian American female, I am, and beyond even is hopeful. Beyond seems expansive, more like in the margins of the frame. So I'm never part of that conversation. And I remember when Chris Rock, during the Oscars, I tweeted that race is not binary, because again, that conversation was like, where am I? And then then he brings up the kid. I'm like, there I am, the smart kid. So it's very frustrating. And when Jennifer asked me to be on this panel, I really hesitated because at some point I'm so tired of talking about race because I just want to do my work, right? But you have to engage. You have to engage because it is a conversation. I'm part of the American Film Showcase, which is a program that the State Department runs with and USC School of Cinematic Arts administers. And I was in Zimbabwe and Brazil earlier this year, and Oscar So White was the first question out of people. Like when we open it up, basically we go there and do master classes for emerging filmmakers and open it up to questions. And the first question, inevitably, in both Brazil and Zimbabwe, was like, as a female, as a person of color in the US, how do you feel about Oscar So White? And you're like, wait, didn't I just fly so many hours? Where am I? So it's the same conversation everywhere. So it's really beyond. It's not only in this room. It's like in places like Recife and Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. It's resonating. So it's
It's amazing.
Did I answer your question? But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And last but not least, Carlos Sandoval, also in the category of people whose awards I can't list in one sitting. He co-directed and produced award-winning documentaries like A Class Apart, about a landmark 1954 Mexican-American civil rights case in the Supreme Court, Farmingville, about hate crimes in Long Island, New York, and The State of Arizona, about volatile debates and protests that emerge over immigration laws in the state. He's a lawyer and a writer whose work has appeared in the New York Times and other publications. Sandoval has worked on immigration and refugee affairs as a member of the U.S. delegation to the United States. Talk about your beyond moments or thoughts.
I think first of all, thanks so much for having me here. I think my beyond moments and thoughts are right now. Because the term intersectionality is absolutely right. It's not one that's part of my lexicon right now, but I think it will become. Because we are at this very transitional moment right now. We're in a moment of great demographic change, with reference to social media, of great technological change. I think the world around us is moving, it's moving swiftly, and with that kind of change comes a lot of fear, and that fear needs to be addressed with conversation. Frankly, when I first saw the topic for today, I recoiled because I thought, I don't want that laundry out there. These are conversations that are so fragile, so difficult, that they need to be had sort of privately, and I don't know how to negotiate them. but I think it's very important to get them out more in the public. I was really interested by what you said, Danielle, in terms of being in the South Bronx. I was not aware that the South Bronx had become that sort of receiving community for immigrants. I know about it historically as a place for Puerto Ricans, having had family that lived up there, but didn't know about this more current iteration of it. And I think that becomes important as we carry on this conversation, because we can have these kind of abstract conversations around this and talk about it in terms of the media, but where it plays out on the day-to-day basis is really on the street, where people are really the working class in many ways, where the struggle is real, where they feel that pie may be limited, and so therefore, how are they going to confront that? Having worked on immigration issues such as Farmingville or in Arizona, we could talk about the benefits of immigration on a macro level, but on a local level, people felt displaced. They really felt that there was a zero-sum game competitive environment there. So as we go forward, I think I think in some ways we're leaders, and we need to think of that. We need to think of that conversation. We need to carry it up to that level. But we also have to realize what is going on in the reality and on the ground. And I think it's worth kind of separating those as we go forward.
Yeah, and we had a very rich conversation in preparation for this panel in which we talked about a lot of these issues, had some, I think, healthy debates. And maybe this is the dirty laundry conversation that Carlos doesn't want to have, but I think if there's a place to start having it, this is it. And people need to engage in these issues. So one of the more difficult issues that I think came up was that much of what we consider diversity or inclusion, which are two of the key words of these 2 days, has been framed on a 1960s African-American activist civil rights framework. There's sort of the idea of we're going to have our normal programming and then we'll have Black History Month, right? I'm generalizing. And in some ways, you can say that we're far from equity, but that African-American filmmakers have achieved some level of visibility for that, that framework and that mindset. Now, the Chris Rock moment, again, not to overuse that, but that was a moment in which I think people felt the idea that, okay, so Blacks have kind of established this foothold, however shaky it might be. Is that at the expense of the other groups? Is the black-white paradigm hurting Asians and Latinos? And so I'd be really interested in hearing from the filmmakers and from Danielle about your personal experiences in the field and whether that has played itself out, or what challenges that you've confronted as you've tried to get your work done and get it out there.
I was personally more interested in whether or not if Black visibility comes at the expense of other groups, but what Blacks will do with that visibility to encompass the concerns of other groups and to work and build coalitions across other groups and find similarities in agenda. And I don't always find people think that way. I think it's something, we talked about this is a paradigm, right? It's either us or it's them. And does becoming successful mean you also take on that paradigm, which now, okay, I have power and I've secured something for myself or my people who I perceive to be my people, and the other people have to figure it out on their own. I've been in other panel discussions and personal conversations whether it's about activism, whether it's recognizing, the other groups that are affected by police violence. Like, a friend of mine mentioned 68 Latinos killed unarmed by police is not mentioned. If it's, there's can we actually expand the conversation with the position that we, speaking as an African American, I'm using the we, but that we have to call attention to the broader themes and to thread the needle, I guess. And that's what interests me. And to me, that's actually what is supposed to be the inherent power in being in a minority-majority country, supposedly. To me, it's this great opportunity to actually recognize commonalities on a larger level and to have a greater platform to fight. Otherwise, if everyone sort of goes to their silos, I think we're losing a huge potential for change.
Yeah, and Carlos, you had some strong thoughts about 2050 and the majority-minority moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've forgotten the exact figures, but in essence, by 2060, we'll definitely be a minority-majority country. Those numbers are changing rapidly as we go forward. I like the way Danielle posits it, which is that we're at that point where we as people who do come into a certain amount of power, who are kind of leaders, what are we going to do with that? Are we going to make certain that things are inclusive, or are we not? One anecdote that goes back now many years in the early 90s. Someone who was the head of advertising for a major corporation was African American. And yet the advertising, and so he was very deeply conscious about representation. But the representation that he had at that point was almost purely African American, with no Hispanic and no Asian. I think that was now 30 years ago, nearly 30 years ago, so 20 years ago. So that was a while ago. I think we've come a long way from that. I hope we have. But I do think that, I'm going to repeat myself here, but it goes back to as we enter into positions as gatekeepers, of being people who have a certain amount of influence and power, are we going to be inclusive as we ourselves step forward? And I think that's the challenge that we have. I also think of moments that are kind of perhaps the more optimistic moments that I've seen along the way. In working on the state of Arizona, we were in Phoenix, we were embedded there for a while. And we were following a movement that we were out of the community there, an immigration rights movement. And it was very, very real because this was the Papers, Please law that was being put forth in 2010 that basically made it, you were illegal for being brown. You could be stopped for being brown. It was a great cultural moment. And there was an organization called Puente that was almost exclusively Hispanic and mostly undocumented. But they needed to build coalitions in order to get somewhere. And someone came on to work with them, a young woman who was African American. Actually, I think her family was from Africa, so she was an African immigrant. And she took on the role of handling their publicity and social media. And she made certain that she would reach out to local African American ministers and got them involved at rallies and speaking. And she made that part of her mission as she went on along the way. She is now one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. She's one of the people who was the architect of their social media campaign, Opal. So that to me is the good way in which all this can come in, the way we can go across that, across cultures, across the divide, then address that intersectionality. And maybe even grow out of that kernel, as she did, gain the tools to then take it on to a much broader movement. But that to me is a very optimistic side of it.
But can I make an interesting point? Because I was on a panel with someone from Black Lives Matter at Columbia months ago. What's interesting is that they, as an organization, they've used the language of intersectionality, right? They want to make sure trans lives are recognized. They want to make sure Black women are recognized. But when their work is talked about in the media, it always, there's a narrative that the media uses that focuses on Black men. So despite the efforts internally to advance a different conversation, is the larger public or people in the media ready to actually listen to that and to take it, or is it just easier to build it into this very old historical narrative, very old historical set of relationships with Black men and et cetera? And I think that's sort of like why we're all here to talk about this. Like, what does it mean to actually want to speak to complexity? Is there a platform for it, or how do we get the nuance out there and heard?
That's an extremely good and important point, and I'm thinking of Orlando right now. I mean, I'm a gay man and I'm Hispanic, and when I heard about what happened in Orlando, it was almost like I was neutered, because I didn't know where to how to react first. And trying to get at the complexity of that when you're deeply a part of all of it. I don't have any answers. I just know that finally the story that hit me most as the most accurate of the lot was one in the New York Times, where they talked about, they came at it more from the immigrant experience. They talked about the head of the emergency room who was Muslim. I think he was, I'm sure, with Afghan background, his parents had been from Afghanistan. And then they talked about the various individuals and how the sort of vibrant immigrant community that had been there had been impacted. And that, to me, when you went down to that level of humanity, that's when the complexity of it surfaced. So, yeah.
And Ramona, you talked a lot in our pre-conversation about boxes and categories, and how you struggle sometimes with saying, I'm an Asian American filmmaker. What does that mean for the work I'm expected to produce, and how I'm perceived, and what happens if I push the boundaries of that box? So do you want to talk a little bit about those experiences?
Well, my work is, the themes in my work are really about the Filipino and Filipino-American experience. And that's what I gravitate towards. I don't choose it because it is about the Filipino or Filipino-American experience. It's what I know. Inside of me, it's stories I like to tell. And I think at the beginning of my career, people would always say, is that all you're going to do? Like, it's not valid, right? Because I've only chosen those themes. As if to validate my work, I had to do more mainstream work. And I used to push against that. I used to always say, oh, no, I'm going to do more mainstream work, later on in my career. But as I've gotten older and gotten established, I'm like, hell no, that's my work. That's what I do, that's what I like doing, and I hope, and even if they're rooted in very specific themes, I think they rise, right? They transcend the specificity of those very particular themes. Yeah, so I've come to embrace it, and I still can't think of myself as a gatekeeper, that's so odd to think of myself as a gatekeeper, but now that I really reflect on it, I guess I am guilty of, I'm always asked to mentor. I do a lot of mentoring, and that, to me, I feel is how I can contribute. And because I have so little time I really mentor Asian American emerging filmmakers, and I choose, right? I'm asked a lot to mentor, but I choose to mentor, and if there is an Asian American and female, I will mentor her, and I'm guilty of that. But just because of time, just because of time, I choose to do that. So I guess I am guilty of choosing, and
I would say to alleviate your guilt that in doing that, you're working against something that has happened. I mean, that's sort of the anti-old boys network, right?
Right.
And so you're counteracting something, and that mentoring, I think, has to be a very organic thing. And it might be, I know we were talking a lot about, well, there's so much to say about what isn't happening and what's going wrong. And it does pay to mention the efforts that are happening that are moving in the right direction, that are pushing this. And I know Carlos is part of both CPB's Next Generation and Firelight Media's Producers Lab. And those are two places in which filmmakers of color are being mentored, promoted, and groomed to be the next generation of gatekeepers.
Yeah. When I use the term gatekeeper, it's because I frequently find myself now being invited to be on a panel that might be reviewing applications for grants and the like. So, that's what I mean by gatekeeper. I don't have the absolute power, but I can contribute to the decision making.
yeah.
And so I think we are in that. As we enter that,
I suppose we are. It's just
Yeah.
interesting because I've never thought of myself as such, but. Yeah, I've been on a lot of panels where I decide who gets the money or not. Yeah, so I guess I am, which is a weird thing, right? Suddenly one day you wake up and you are.
You are powerful, Ramona. You are powerful.
Who knew? But yeah, it's just interesting.
And one of the groups that I'm involved with is Firelight Media, and I will be talking more about them this afternoon. It is an organization that was started by Stanley Nelson, the incredible filmmaker Stanley Nelson, and its mission is really to take filmmakers who are, emerging filmmakers who are at that point of their career where they can go on and do more, but may need that mentoring, may need that sort of development work, and so they connect the filmmakers with mentors, people such as myself. I don't know how much I actually offer, but we work with them, and Firelight does incredible things such as bringing people in for rough cut screenings and have more experienced filmmakers in the field comment on and help out through that difficult process of the edit. But one of the things that going back to our topic today, that Firelight very definitely works with in terms of its fellows is diversity. I mean, those fellows, and it's not black white, it's not black brown, it's a cross. It really is. The fellows are Latino, African American, Muslim, Asian, and it's new voices. It's so exciting to be at their meetings or at their groupings, because you feel not only a sense of excitement and emergence, but you just feel a sense of challenge and creativity in there. It's a really exciting group to be a part of. But it is, and it creates for all sorts of dialogues. And I'm also with Next Generation Leadership, which is a CPB-funded initiative, as is Firelight, to get more diversity in the pipeline for senior and executive content decision makers throughout public media. And we were at the PBS annual meeting, and that is a sort of wonderfully sea of sameness as you go throughout. In many ways, very, very good people, but definitely a lack of color throughout. And when we were there, you could see the Firelight Fellows and the NGL Fellows all kind of gathering together, because it felt like, another face that I can recognize and deal with. So there's also the sense of camaraderie that extends to these programs, which is really interesting. And again, across the board, very, very diverse. And I think that as we form our cohorts, we are building the bonds that go across racial and ethnic lines.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning the work that Danielle has done, because she's providing the venue for the films to be seen by diverse audiences and for people to have the conversation. We can groom all the young and emerging filmmakers we want, but if there aren't places like Bronx Documentary Center who are showing the films and getting them to audiences, and audiences who might not normally watch documentary films or go to festivals like AFI, then we're not, there's only one side of the equation. We're not creating new audiences.
Well, there's something related to both of what you're saying that I want to weave in about being broad thinking or having broad tastes. So someone like me, I'm African American. I'm interested in, I work in a community that's people of color, which it almost calling it begins to fall apart when you look at all of the diversity of experiences within the community in the South Bronx. But the work that we show is by photographers and filmmakers of all kinds of backgrounds, and people do respond. When we started the Bronx Doc Center, there were people who said, these people don't like documentary, and that came from within the community, and that came from without. But there should be, I think you have to have some latitude with what you think people want to see, and that affects how you program. So I'll never forget, for example, an exhibition we did of Stephanie Sinclair's photographs of child brides and child marriage in 5 countries. And, there's a woman that came into the gallery, lived in the Lower East Side in the housing projects. She had just finished reading one of the books that was out that year by a child bride from the Middle East, and she made it all the way up to the Bronx, and she had to see this show. I mean, there are more and more cases like that where, you see an expansiveness in people's interests and people's thinking. It's not just we're serving Latinos and African Americans and we have to only show Latino and African American work. People are interested in more things. And when I hear about the way you talk about your work, when I first heard about what Ramona's working on, it's like, that's the kind of thing that could be perfect. It's like, no, we're not we're not catering to a specifically Filipino community, but a film that deals with diaspora and family, being in two places, connected. Like there's many people that can connect to that, so we have to begin to find the universal in what people think is the marginal, because it's there, you know, and we have to build across across these sectors or silos of people.
And our younger, more diverse audiences are not seeing the world in a white versus something way. It is not a group of color in discussion with white people. It is not even on broadcast television all the time. They're gravitating towards streaming media and crowdfunding and other ways of disrupting the current power structures. And so I think when we look at the future of film and the future of storytelling, these are important things to consider as we look at an audience that doesn't see race in either a binary way or even a 4 or 5 checkbox kind of way. So with that in mind, I asked our filmmakers to share some clips of their work that show this intersectional conversation beyond white versus other that we can sort of take in and discuss and reflect on. So do we want to start with Ramona's? And is that?
I guess.
Yeah. Is that ready?
Okay, so this is it's an excerpt from The Learning, which was about 4 Filipino teachers who were recruited by the Baltimore public school system to teach in Baltimore. So I followed their first year in the system, and then I went back with them to the Philippines, and then I filmed for 2 years, a year and a half. And this clip you're going to see, I think, is an interaction between Dorotea, one of the major main characters, Filipino teacher, and Nicole, one of her the students she was having difficulty with.
Nicole, Miss Godinez, move. You ain't gotta talk to me like that. You're a rude teacher. Ow! It's like, no, Miss Godinez, you're a nice teacher.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Your noise. I'm sick. My ears are getting.
What you talking about? Miss Godinez. Miss Godinez, you know I love you. Yeah.
Okay, just write one description of the aluminum foil.
What, right here?
Yeah. And then one description of copper chloride.
What you want us to do with it?
Describe it. That's all you gotta do. You already know how it looks.
Marvin,
Don't tell me what to do.
He was telling me about
are you done?
Yes.
Okay. Next. How many cups do you have? 2.
Miss Godinez, move me. These people, they talking stuff I don't even know. Miss Godinez! I need to move! They talking reckless over here.
What you so loud for?
You getting on my nerves.
Okay, next. Are you ready? Record as many observations as you can.
Drink this.
What's all this right here?
So indicate the color of cup number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I'm happy as long as I look like
Miss Godinez, why you look so mean?
Again?
Why you look mean?
Because you're noisy.
No,
And you're not doing your work.
I gave my observation right here.
Right here. About the data table.
Oh, all right.
So weird.
I love you.
You're so weird.
Today?
Yeah, today, very, all the adjectives in dictionary.
I'm just happy today.
You're just happy? That's why you act like that? What makes you happy?
Every day.
Everything?
Happy. I woke up happy.
You woke up happy this morning?
Yep. Did you wake up mean?
No.
You didn't wake up mean?
Why are you mean, Mrs. Godinez? Why? Am I mean? Why did you say so?
Because you was yelling at me.
I'm not.
You were.
Because you're loud, that's why. And I want my voice to be louder than yours because you can't hear me.
Don't you love us?
No, I love you, Nicole.
You know what I want to be? Police officer.
You? You might be a very strict police officer.
Yeah, I'm going to be strict. I'm going to be locking everyone up. all the drug dealers and child
So that's why you have to finish your high school
Right.
and proceed to college for that dream to come true.
Yeah.
So be good in school.
I'm trying to. It's hard because you have so many kids around that's trying to influence you to do bad stuff. That is hard.
Wow, it brings back a lot of memories. No, that was very difficult to film. We filmed in 4 different schools. I was given carte blanche to film in 2 high schools, a middle school, and a lower school, like early education, which was the toughest because it was tough to get permission for the kids, right? But the school system, they had their lawyers on it. They helped us craft a release form that they sent out to all the principals, and everyone had to sign off. I'm still not sure to this day why they did it, but they gave me permission. So it was a very interesting experience because it was really 2 marginalized groups, right, coming together, and no knowledge really of each other, right? So even they're in the same class, they're in the same space, some speaking the same language, but it might as well be 2 different languages. They, in the beginning, they couldn't understand each other. And then you watch, throughout the year, they forged this kind of bond, which was very different from anything else I had seen. And all the kids would say, yeah, the teachers, they have no preconception of us, right? As African-American kids. They have no cultural baggage. They treat us like any other person. And so it was this kind of coming together, especially with Nicole and Dorothea. I mean, Nicole really tried Dorothea. Every day Nicole would be there, in Dorothea's face. But they formed this amazing bond at the end, which was really, it was so heartwarming. And I saw that with the 4 teachers too. And it was very hard to define this film because it was either going to be, is it about the students or is it about the teachers? I'm like, it's about both. It's about these 2 sort of disparate groups of people coming together in a space, and they have to navigate and form a relationship because they have to, right? Because it's school, it's education, teacher, student. But I felt like I always had to be on one or the other side. I said, no, it's somewhere in the middle, and we're going to see what happens, So thankfully, ITVS bought it. After a while, though, after I'd already filmed, they go, oh, I see what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, was it a difficult sell because it wasn't a Filipino filmmaker making a film about a purely Filipino topic?
No.
Was it, is this an African-American film?
Yes, it was
film?
more that. What is it about? Is it about the immigrant experience, or is it about the experience, an educational story, right? Which is it? If it's an educational story, it had to be about then the students. If it was an immigrant story, then it had to be about the teachers. I said, let's try both. Why can't it be both? Which is a very tough sell until they got it. Then until they saw, it can be both.
And what I love about the film is that at every moment I had a preconceived notion of what each person in the film was going to act like. And at every moment, they sort of bent that a little bit, or there was something unexpected that happened. And I think that constant cognitive dissonance between, oh, wow, why do I have this expectation in my mind? Who formed that? And why am I both surprised and pleased when that doesn't happen? And that's a very powerful experience. Carlos, you have a clip from State of Arizona that we're going to watch.
Yes, it's actually an outtake. It was a moment that I filmed with a tiny Sony Handycam, so this is not color corrected, no sound, but it's a very visceral moment. Let me set up for you a little bit. This was in Arizona, in Phoenix, outside the state legislature. In the film we follow the infamous law SB 1070, the Paper Please Law. The Arizona legislature went on to consider more anti-immigrant laws, one of which was challenging the birthright citizenship clause of the U.S. Constitution. You all may remember the term anchor babies. Well, this is the anchor baby debate. And this moment is actually as the Senate as the House is in session considering the measure. The Senate is in session considering the measure. There are protesters outside, and this is a little bit of brown on brown warfare.
Right, you guys are just losing grip. Right now, you guys are like, right at your fingertips, you guys are losing grips. That's why you're here. You know what? They've been anchor babies since 1492. Who said that? Who said that?
Been anchor babies since
Who said that? I did. Why? Why do you want to say that? Were you here in 1942? My family ancestors were.
What's your family? Who's your family?
What nationality are you?
What nationality?
What
I'm an American.
An American. Anybody from North or South America is an American.
I know where I came from, and I'm proud of where I came from. My people were here first, and my people will be here last.
Either you accept it or go back where you came from. Either you accept that our people are going to stay here and we're going to belong, or you go back where you came from.
Let me tell you, those people deliberately come here, a lot of them, and have lots of kids. I live in a trailer park, and there's some Mexican families that have 6 or 7 kids, and every time they get kids, they go out and get some extra money from the state or the welfare department.
So they're the only people who are doing that.
That's wrong. Why is it right that people can sneak into our borders and claim citizenship? I grew up in poverty. Did I go burglarize or trespass somebody's house and say, oh,
yeah, but
I was in
people?
economic need? I was in economic need, so I'm going to go break the law and do whatever I want.
Why
Does
was
that
it
give me
okay
a
in
right
1492 to come in and break the law and come and steal everything? Why was that okay?
Who enslaved the native peoples of Mexico? The Spanish.
European and
the Spanish.
They're white too.
You got white in your blood. You're Mexican.
I'm not white. No,
You're
I'm not.
part white.
No, I'm not. I don't have to claim that right blood.
You're an idiot.
You're an idiot. Go away.
Constructive conversations. This was a moment for me that captured so much texture and density around what it is to be a Latino. It goes into conquest, it goes into indigenous roots, it goes into how one identifies. And the guy, by the way, with the beret is actually Peruvian, so he was also Latino. And I just wanted, in a way, I selected the clip because it is so visceral, but I also think that as we talk about intersectionality, we have to realize that it's so hard to really enter into that point when people are stuck in that intersection, when people can't really carry on conversations. And that happens even within groups. And sometimes the divide comes across ideology, and it's not necessarily about race, so it gets sort of played out in that way. So yeah, that's it for there. And just the point at which they come of you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, that to me summarizes so much of where our political discourse is these days.
Yeah, in the end, it's not really about color at all when it devolves that much. And I'm curious why that didn't make it in.
Storytelling. We couldn't linger. It took too much to set it up, for one. Another, just equality. It was, as I said before, it was handheld and very shaky, and you saw a little white object floating around, dust on the lens. But also, it's for me. I work collaboratively with others, and this was a moment that didn't resonate with them as much as it did for me. I think you really have to have studied Latin American history and literature and the Hispanic experience in this hemisphere to fully appreciate what's going on there. And it was so encapsulated, so rushed, that it was not something that could be unpacked or translate easily. I go back and forth on leaving it out, but whenever I go to a clip for something, I kind of find myself coming back to this moment.
And Danielle, did you have images? So Danielle has some Bronx Documentary Center.
Yeah, I'm just going to show some images. So this is the gallery. We started in 2011. Michael Camber and I, he's a photojournalist that was working for the New York Times covering conflict, bought this building from the city, and then we turned it into an exhibition space. So this is our first exhibition, Tim Hetherington's work from Libya. This is where deep listening is important because people would come in and see these images and say, is this the Bronx? And this was like Libya from the Arab Spring. So we said, no. So, you listen and you learn and you try to understand what people's perceptions are. So this is a group we had. Briefly, this is an exhibition an intern of ours did in coalition with South Bronx Tenants, the Housing Tenants Association, and about toxic mold, exhibition on all the community gardens in the Bronx. We had a garden party. We have a garden. did workshops on herbalism, and it's great because there's a really great movement of community gardening in the Bronx, but also reminding people that before we were urban, we were country. We worked in the soil. No matter who you are living up there in the South Bronx, that's most likely true. Another exhibition, the anniversary of the Iraq invasion. Refugee Hotel is an exhibition we did, and people would come in. I had 2 conversations in particular. People were very angry to see an exhibition about refugees. They said they get more money than I do here, which was not this is those kinds of internal relationships that I couldn't have anticipated and tensions I didn't know existed. Opening reception, this is the Stephanie Sinclair exhibition, school groups exhibition opening, exhibition by Bronx photographers. I'm getting to some film stuff, it's in here. It's our holiday portraits. Screening we did in the Claremont Housing Projects, holiday portraits. Sorry, I'm moving through this pretty quickly. It's just a little bit of film stuff. I mean, we did a great event, for example. We did Central Park 5 with 80 high school students, and we had filmmakers and some of the subjects come in and speak with the students, and which is a more of an example, sort of a direct correlation. Like these are issues we're talking about, police violence and criminality, et cetera, that can affect you. We also had lots of other types of events with people in the community. We showed Rafea Solar Mama, for example, which is about a Bedouin woman, and began a conversation about, you know, the treatment of women and in the South Bronx, and what are positive alternatives. You know, we did other screenings, for example, Sister by Brenda Davis, which is about maternal mortality in Ethiopia, Haiti, and maybe Yemen, and had 5 people on a panel discussion from the Bronx who are working on maternal health. So we had a pastor come in when we did our very, very first screening of Born into Brothels, actually. He said, you're bringing the Bronx to the world, and the world to the Bronx. So we're using the programming of documentary film for people to see themselves in the larger world. It's an area where people are very isolated in a lot of ways.
And I got a sense there was never one predominant identity group at any event.
No.
You wouldn't walk in and say, "Oh, this is a Black community event. This
No.
is a
And I think
Latino community
and
event."
I think for that reason, I'm interested in finding other people. Like as an African American, I'm not working within that sort of African American photography. I support a lot of African American photographers. The Bronx Photo League is a group that comes out of the BDC whose work's been seen in the New York Times, et cetera. But there's not one group, and what we've done over time is brought in people. We did a Mexican show and set of screenings and had people from the community, Mexicans and Mexicans Americans, help us to curate and select films and to give us context. So as an African American, as a person of color, I also have to be prepared to say, I don't know everything. I can't speak for everything in this experience, and I need to learn and make sure I'm doing things correctly as well. So the onus is also on me as a gatekeeper. So
I think this is a great segue into the question of what next? What comes next now that we're at this moment and we have this new national awareness, media awareness, and we have a moment in which some events, not all of them positive, are forcing this sharpened focus and this, I think, desire to maybe invest in some of these issues and these conversations. So I'd also like to invite our audience now to chime in and maybe offer some ideas to this discussion or maybe ask our panelists some questions. But does anyone want to kick off the discussion to the what next question?
I'll say one thing I just learned about, which I'm going to be going to as soon as I get back to New York, is this project called BUFU, and it's a month of Black and Asian futurity, and it's these young activists and organizers who are, so there's a group that's Asian, and there's a group that is, there's actually like this group that's like Indigenous and Latina from the Bronx and some African Americans, and they've organized a month of programming, and they're making a series of documentary films about coalition building across these groups. Yeah, it's totally crazy. It's in a garage. I don't know, BUFU? Yeah, I think Vice did something on them recently. So that, I found out about that over the weekend. That gives me hope. And they're also very young, so it's important to note that.
If we don't have a question, let me jump in. Mm-hmm. It's not so much a prediction as it is a concern about the future. And that is that as Latinos come in, just through sheer dint of our numbers, the largest demographic going through right now, I do have a concern about how this question of intersectionality will be handled by us. And I'm going to be speaking out against my people right now, but there is a lot of unawareness and of racism in Latin America, from various countries. We bring that with us as we come in. How we navigate that, I think, is going to be a huge challenge for us. And again, just by dint of our numbers, we will enter into those positions of power. So I have no answers other than being aware and being intentional and seeing my role, as I'm realizing this speaking now, in terms of trying to midwife that process a bit as we go forward. And I've been working on next generation leadership and talking to the leadership at various local stations about diversity and public media stations. And diversity is real. Intentionality is about making certain as you go through your hiring processes that you're inclusive. And as I'm sort of thinking about this now, I'm thinking this is a physician heal thyself moment, and that we have to think about our own intentionality as a group as we come forward in being inclusive. So I guess that's and it goes very much back to where you started, Danielle, with this conversation. So yeah, I think we really have to be aware of that. And you were talking about what the role of media and how they, for example, have talked about Black Lives Matter. How do we make certain that those conversations are as textured as necessary?
Can you speak a little bit about making sure you're making media that really represents the full spectrum of intersectionality?
So I was showing a work in progress of the learning, and someone in the audience said, well, the teachers actually questioning why the teachers chose to leave their own families and come here to basically take care of other children, right? That's really the story. And questioning that and taking, basically saying, but, in the Philippines, they didn't really have to leave because they weren't poor enough. And, and I remember her saying, and I've seen poor because I've been to India. I saw poor in India, and they didn't look like that. The poor in India are really poor. And so she was like offended that they left their children and came and made that decision. And that's so unanswerable and layered, and you're like, I mean, who gets to define poor? Who gets to define, what your needs are? So, and I think it's a worldview, right? That the stories that I make, that people of color make, of other countries, of other cultures, have to be a certain way, right? It has to uphold this certain worldview of the dispossessed. So if you make a film about, say, the middle class of that country, it's a little bit of problematic, right? Because it goes against, or it's not part of the worldview.
And had these teachers been male, would that be critique of why did they leave their families?
Probably not.
Speaking of intersectionality,
All four of my main characters, of my main teacher, the teachers were female, because 90% of the teachers who were recruited were female. But I also I tried to have a couple. I followed a couple of male teachers. But they weren't as forthcoming. They didn't get the full access part of the description of my film. So they were cut off. I didn't use them.
And I think one maybe unanswerable question is what films are not being made because filmmakers feel like, well, I'm not sure that audiences or funders will get this version of the X or XYZ experience. And so how is some level of self-censorship or self-editing going on?
Yeah, I mean, I've come to the point of my career that, I no longer think about that. But earlier, certainly, and I think I'd also told you, funders would look at a cut of my film, and there would be the other end of the spectrum, right? There would be a cockfight. I put in a cockfight. And One of the funders said, well, don't put that because that's so stereotypical, right? That raises a lot of questions. I said, but cockfights happen in the Philippines. I mean, it's, you're seeing it from a very U.S.-centric point of view, but cockfights are regular and they do happen. Because no, because that brings up a lot of questions and those conversations happen all the time and you fight for it and I win, but it's, because you have to.
That's the important part.
You have to, to protect the story. You have to protect the film.
If I could just come back to the question for a second about inclusivity in terms of gender, a couple of observations which are very personal. One, as I mentioned before, I am gay, but I've chosen to make films that are really about the Hispanic experience. That, in part, has been intentional, and that I feel that there are a lot of great filmmakers out there who are already and have more resources and can talk and have talked about the queer experience. So I felt that I didn't need to go there. In the same way that as a lawyer, I felt that I didn't need to go down the route of litigation or doing legal work where I might have an impact on the dialogue, was to do story, was to do film. So that was a personal decision. But also, it made me think back, again, with the experience with Arizona. This organization that I talked about, Puente, that was very much organizing on the ground. There was someone who came in who was transgendered. I'm not quite sure, it was male to female, dressed in ways at times that were female but not entirely. So there was always a little bit of discomfort that I felt, even with that. We never featured, and I look back and I questioned myself, why not? And in part it was my discomfort, in part it was the cockfight metaphor, because it enters into yet another layer of conversation that you feel will be distracting from your main narrative. So I don't really know how to answer that, other than to say that overall, going back to the gatekeeper thing, I do know that in the world of media, in the world of filmmaking, and on the funding panels that I've been on, that is included insofar as films that experience has been included, is included. The Warrior, I can't remember the name of the film right now, but it was about, I'm sorry, was it? It's the Warrior. Yeah, exactly. About transgendered people in Indonesia?
Correct.
Yeah. So there are, they are reflective and they have been incorporated. They do get brought along the way. But you're right. Have that as a reminder in here.
I just finished sorry. Were you about to say something?
Yeah, you can go and then I'll
Yeah, this is really quick. I just finished a film. It's called Motherland. It's set in the Philippines, in the busiest maternity hospital in the Philippines. One of the nurses is transgender. But, it's a completely observational film, so we never really address that. She's there. She's a main character. She's transgender. But, and all the comments were like, well, she's transgender. Yes, she is. But, it's normative. She's trans. But why don't you talk about that? I'm like, because people didn't talk about it. She's just a character, But people want to say, but can you comment on that? I'm like, no, not really, because she's just really part of the hospital. And, she's just treated normally. So it's really interesting.
And that's a comment right there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think building off of what both of you are saying, we have to be mindful of our own internal priorities around representation, or how people, or what actually is the story. Because one thing that came to mind when you said I don't focus on queer experience, I focus on the Hispanic experience. So my next thought was, to you, is the Hispanic experience straight, and why, or where? And I think that, I see this sometimes in photography too, where there's a political priority to reflect people a certain way with dignity, et cetera. And I was on a panel some months ago. It's like, well, what about the complexity, of just how people are? And I think that's part of the work. And I think the example you've made with your film, where you can have a transgender character and it doesn't have to be a whole issue. Exactly. It's the same thing. It's sort of like, it's the same thing with, like, can a black character just be in a movie and just not have it be, sort of like a colorblind approach, but looking at that across the spectrum, I think that's important work that we have to do.
in many ways, that's the very definition of privilege, is to get to be something and not have that be the thing that defines you, that you get to be a nurse.
There's a time and a place to have certain conversations, but to just be in the background in the world and however you are, I think we have to look at where we also censor those things being able to happen within our own internal cultural biases.
I'm struck with the idea that we are in this kind of divisive soundbite distillation kind of environment, whether that's in social media, whether it's in our mainstream media. So I'm just wondering whether or not you feel like there's any difference in the work that you do, whether you feel that at all.
Yes, social media requires us to go down to those limited characters. But what social media can do also is spark the conversation. This conversation was the result of a tweet, so that there is that sort of way in which it can go more profound. I think it's also, as storytellers, what we want to do is to make things deeper. And we're hoping that people will remain in that moment. To your real question, are they getting engaged? Are they going beyond the tweet? I would have to say yes, but I don't know generationally where that answer comes in. Because right now we're seeing a golden age of documentaries. People are really want depth of stories. They want richness. They want to experience it. They want to be immersive. And maybe not immersive in terms of VR yet, but immersive in terms of staying in that moment. So I would say that that we have these contradictory notions going on in terms of the soundbite and in terms of the fullness of it. There's also, I think, a little bit of a question as to where we're going to go in the digital world as we come into more and more. And right now, the fashion is short videos and the op-doc kind of thing. What's going to be the impact of that? I think we're living through that transition. So there's a lot of change and rift. But the other part of it is going back to what I was trying to say before, we were talking about in terms of being true, in terms of complexities within the stories that we tell. And yet I've been forced to think for myself that in some ways you need to, as with this transgender character that was, that was part of this the organization that I was following. The story has to be clear, and so you sometimes need to make decisions and delineate and come down. So where your judgment comes out in that, did you want to get sidetracked into the nurse being transgendered? No, it was organic. Right. It was there. It was visible. And that may be the way to answer. But how to, again, going back to Danielle's point of what's our job in terms of the complexity, trying to incorporate that as a storyteller as I think about the need to keep a clean line, because audiences can only take in so much, and how you do that. That's an interesting challenge for me right now. But yeah, thank you for the question, Billy.
I think the beauty of documentary is that the stories will change and the characters will change. And as characters define themselves differently, filmmakers won't have a choice. There won't be somebody who says, I am just this, or I am many things, and this is part of my story. And then as that happens, I think we'll naturally go through an evolution. Anyone have closing thoughts, or?
I kind of hope that we're just going to get to a place where everyone can recognize there's so many multiplicities within that a lot of these camps or lines sort of erase. Like there's always culture and lining across like culture and geography and these sorts of things, but to be just lumped in to one group and then you're representing, African American, whatever, or Hispanic or whatever, it's like you can just deal with people as they are, rather than, these other signifiers.
Ramona Carlos?
I'm thinking of my role as a filmmaker who has chosen to tell stories that are really about the Latino experience. My need to kind of stay true to that, because I think that there's still a very necessary part of that. And then I think also my role as a gatekeeper, which is one of making certain that I'm intentional about being inclusive. So, there's I don't know how, those are two very opposing notions. I don't know how to reconcile them, but they seem to me to be true to where I am right now. But I also want to say this was a very, very good conversation to have had, and I think a necessary one for where we are right now, and I hope it continues on.
Like I said, I was hesitant to be part of this panel, but I'm glad. I'm really happy I chose to engage.
I am too.
As a filmmaker, I make films about, I know there are certain themes, but I do make films about just people. and their experiences. And hopefully it will become just normative and not a Filipino American experience or an Asian American experience. And it'll become, to use that word, the universal experience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Structural versus additive, we would say. And
there you go.
Well, thank you all for being a great audience, and to the three of you for sharing so generously, and again to Jennifer for thinking of this panel and inviting us all here. Thanks so much.